Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. Welcome to Health Matters, Designing Communities That Learn. I'm Kira Gould, and I'm really excited about this panel this afternoon. We have some great people here to talk about a topic that I think is really quite important. Before I get started, I want a little bit of a sense of who you guys are. So if I'm just going to do the show of hands thing. Developers, architects, landscape architects, urban designers, administrators, marketing communications folks, there's some of us out there, artists, advocates, activists, educators, excellent, engineers, didn't mean to leave you last, no offense, others, ooh, lots of others, good. So sorry, I didn't have all the categories in there. Last year at Greenbuild, Dr. Dick Jackson spoke really eloquently about how urban design and architecture are public health issues, and I was fortunate to be invited to be on a panel, which also included our moderator, Szenasy, after his talk. And it was a really dynamic conversation. It included a Philadelphia public health official and several others about how to bridge this divide between the design of buildings and their ability to support human health and well-being, both in the short and long term. And we thought Greenbuild in New Orleans would be a great place to scale that conversation up to the community level. So that was the impetus for this conversation. These are the learning objectives required by Greenbuild. So we are going to talk about what material health means at the community scale, talk about what it means to be a community that learns, what some of the aspects of that are, sort of in practice, and how to apply some of these objectives to design, urban design and planning, and define some new ways of communicating about material health. What I'd like to do today, if you're willing to join us to do this, is kind of work towards a little bit of a collective intelligence, if not conclusions about the topic. And you'll hear from Susan Szenasy, our moderator, a little bit about this, because there's a lot of reaching on this kind of subject, and not a lot of achieving. And I think she and I both share a desire to see some more advancements toward the achieving part. So it would be great. We hope that you will engage with us on those topics. So we're going to go through. We have, as you see, 5 of us speaking, plus Susan, our moderator, and in between each speaker, we will have some discussion, and you should have received index cards. Please feel free to write questions on those. We would like you to, if you'd rather, you could tweet those, and I will put up that address in just a second. First, let me just introduce the panel and our moderator. Susan Szenasy is a friend and mentor and the inimitable publisher and editor-in-chief of Metropolis magazine, right here in the front row, which she has led since 1986. And she's an internationally recognized authority on design and sustainability. And if you have not seen the book of her writings and talks, which was published in March, called Szenasy Design Advocate, I highly recommend it. We will then hear from Colette Krapel, who joined SQ Dumez Ripple last year as principal and director of urban strategies. She has 25 years of experience as an architect and planner, including 10 as university architect and director of planning for Tulane. She also served as city planner in New York before returning to New Orleans to establish design for public spaces and teach at Tulane. And she might mention, I didn't get the full title of. Her firm has recently published a booklet about resilience that I think you will mention. Sandy Stroud will be speaking after Colette, and she has 2 decades of experience as a real estate professional specializing in community engagement, project feasibility, financial analysis, project management, and development. She's principal of Urban Focus, which operates from New Orleans and Washington, D.C. And then we'll hear from Flozell Daniels. He's CEO and president of the Foundation for Louisiana. I'm just, right. Foundation for Louisiana, formerly the Louisiana Disaster Recovery Foundation, leading the organization in its mission to invest in people and practices that reduce vulnerability and build stronger, more sustainable communities throughout the state. And last, we will hear, perhaps very quickly, if we're long-winded, Jonathan Light, who is director at Alembic Community Development's New Orleans office, which invests in long-term partnerships in underserved neighborhoods. Jonathan develops mixed-use properties and affordable houses and providing capacity building and development services to nonprofits. And he'll talk about a really exciting project that's about to open locally. So that's a great case study for us to go to. So please tweet. I would actually use the @KiraGould if you want to tweet or write on cards or raise your hand to speak, and we'll bring a microphone to you during the interludes between the speakers and during the session at the end. Because we really would like to have your questions, your feedback. And these are some of we have 2 sets of questions for you to think about. So these are the ones that we'd like you to think about at the front end. Just what is a community that learns to you? What are the features? What are the words, the qualities? Where have you lived that has that feeling? Where have you lived that doesn't have that feeling? And what things might bring that to it? And what does health mean in terms of community for you? Is it food? Is it mobility? What are the things that occur? And then where have you lived, where it worked or did not? And also, what would one element of a community health audit look like to you if you were to consider, looking at your community and trying to assess that? So those are answer 1 or none, as you see fit. So as I said, I'm with William McDonough Partners, Director of Communications, also co-author of Women in Green, Voices of Sustainable Design. And I'm a contributing editor at Metropolis Magazine as well. So what are we talking about when we say that health matters? Again, this is back to the point of design as a public health issue. And I think this is important because, and this is actually something that sort of inspired me about Susan's career, because it's sort of seeing design as much bigger than most of the world sort of understands architecture or product design as a narrow field, but seeing how it affects so many other things. And one thing about this, of course, is that, can we actually impact does design and planning get in the way of an organic process for a community? Or can it be a mechanism towards it? And then similarly, what is a community or place that learns? And the idea about that came from this book called How Buildings Learn, which was published in 1995. Stuart Brand wrote this book. And if you don't know it, it's really a gem. It's been an inspiration for many designers over the year and many people in the firm that I work with. The cover, in fact, shows buildings in New Orleans from 1857 and 1993. And the idea is that we still think of buildings as finished somehow when we occupy them. But of course, that's just the beginning of their life. It's not the end. And they will be adapted. They may decline, or they may possibly continuously improve. Ideally, that's what we would like to see. So too communities. They change over time, and the question is whether or how we can impact those changes to make them, in effect, be learning labs by design. So again, thinking about these questions, there are a number of elements about communities that manifest or support or make them a learning place. Because our case study today that Jonathan will be speaking about. I mentioned food at the front because I think that it's such a great story. You'll hear about this fantastic adaptive reuse. And that's about bringing healthy food into a community and what that means for the community and making sure that those systems are available to the people living there. And then there are the policies that support that. And then there's education and health systems and buildings. And then, of course, history and story. Story is very, very important. Resource effectiveness, mobility and access, climate adaptability and resilience. I think the overarching question is really, what is the social contract that a place has with someone who lives and works there? How do you relate to it on a day-to-day basis, and how does it work to fulfill those needs? During the research for the book that I co-authored with Lance Hosey, Women in Green, one issue that came up again and again was how hard it seemed to be to make meaningful change, meaningful and actionable change in our systems, particularly the sort of design and construction world, and the policy systems that constrain and surround it. So many of our leaders want to see for our cities and our buildings and our products. And this is exactly why the notion of continuous improvement is so important. So many of you may be familiar with the firm, William McDonough & Partners. We have 2 studios, one in Charlottesville, Virginia, and one in San Francisco. And our work is based on William McDonough's cradle-to-cradle concepts. And some fundamental questions that drive us, which are, we try to bring it back to really, really basic questions, sometimes a little too basic for some people, but, how do we love all the children of all species for all time? But it's good to bring it way back and then be able to open it up and see how we can seek opportunities to support and transform local and regional communities through active economic, social, and political engagement. In the end, recognizing that in the end, of course, all sustainability is local. So this sequence of slides is a little wonky, but it shows what we at the firm like to call, Bill likes to call, signals of design failure, which are regulations. This shows the sequence and increase in how many of them there have been in recent years, which, is, if you overlay it with the development of the green building movement, it's a little bit surprising in some ways that we've not been more successful at dealing with more of these things. But there is just increasing regulation because we're not addressing these things by design. So that's really what's happening there. This is a slide that explains what we at the firm talk about, the continuous cycle. This includes material production, building production, occupancy and use, and material recovery, and it just is continuous. This relates to the topic I was mentioning before about how we just want to see it as a continuum rather than, finished building concept. And I'm going to show a couple of quick slides of some current and recent projects. This is under construction, this Method Factory in Chicago, where we are asking the question, how can we positively engage in a community, provide jobs, generate food, harvest energy, and make clean, green products? At Make It Right, which is here in New Orleans, we were asking the question, Brad Pitt and Bill McDonough were asking the question, how can you make it right for people to come home again after a disaster? And this one's a little complicated because, of course, there are many infrastructure issues that overlay with all of that, and we can talk more about that. Footprints is a hospitality client that we have, and they're really asking a question about how can we create fun, healthy, meaningful, and relaxing experiences while working with the local community and improving wildlife habitats. NASA's sustainability base in Mountain View, California, is asking the question, how do you design an office space to continuously improve over time? And at Blue Butterflies, we were asking about, can we reuse existing structures to provide a haven for returning veterans while also protecting, restoring, and enhancing biodiversity through design? It's a really interesting project in Southern California. So just to close, we can change the way we make things, but the thing we have to think about carefully, I think, is how we can design for possibilities and positive evolution without sort of designing the conclusion. So I think that's something that, as we discuss all the issues that the panelists will bring up, we can talk about some of those pieces and parts. And I will put that up for a second. And
seconds to engage in a conversation. So it's Kira and everyone in the panel, really. I think what's really interesting right now is that we have experienced the 20th century as a century of alienation and the 21st century as a century of connectivity. And the alienation we have really well documented through movies, through books, through everything, through our lives, everything. So now the connectivity is, there's the Occupy movement, there's the Arab Spring, there's this incredible sharing of information. So what I'd like us to keep in mind and kind of comment on right now, anyone on the panel, is, do you feel that that is where we are, or am I just blowing smoke here? Am I being too much of an idealist? Kira, tell me. Set me straight.
No, you are not.
Okay.
That's our landscape. You've described it. It's the landscape. But that's sort of the global landscape, right? And then we have to make sense of the local as well. And I think that's maybe the pull there.
And I think that's exactly what we're going to deconstruct here,
Yep.
because I think the various levels of experience that is represented on this panel will lead us through the possibilities that exist. And then we hope you all get involved with us in a deeper conversation that's meaningful to you too, because we'd love to hear what your various programs are. So 7 seconds, and we're ready to roll.
Okay. Well, if you'll allow me to present to you 8 minutes of counterintuitives, I would call them that. These are examples that are not ones that you would immediately think of as building health. I've tried to pick 3, and each of them comes from a position that I've been fortunate enough to hold. The first one is from my time as the planning director here for the city of New Orleans. The second is from my 10 years as university architect at Tulane University, and the third is from my new role as principal and director of urban strategies at SQ Dumas and Ripple, a local firm with national recognition. But before I do, I will share this little image that is very ironic. If you can see, you'll see this billboard trying to shout at everyone to eat their fruits and vegetables, but it's really painful to notice that there are no sidewalks and there's no bike lane, and there are a number of deficiencies in the landscape that you're looking at there. So another example that I'll bring in a way on the other end of the spectrum perhaps is, and this representing the little steps that we take to foster community health. This is just something that I pulled at Logan Airport. It's a little placard from the health plan that says if you have enough time to walk to this end of the concourse and the other end and back, you will have walked whatever it is, a mile and a half or 2 miles. And I juxtapose that Logan active lifestyle image from this, which is about the urban street. And in this case, all of these photos are from here in New Orleans. So obviously the need to address community health through urban infrastructure of our streets and of our community facilities is much more acute and compelling a landscape, I feel. So to my examples, you wouldn't necessarily think that, I'm realizing something's a little bit out of order here, but anyway, I'll try to get back to that one. You wouldn't think that confronting a super Walmart coming right into the urban fabric of New Orleans would be thought of as a healthy example. But in fact, this was, and you see the orange dot, that is where the Walmart was actually built adjacent to the Mississippi riverfront. This was before Katrina, and at that time, you realize how much the landscape of the city has changed, but the city was considered severely under-retailed. That was the Walmart expression. It's severely under-retailed. Once the mayor and the Blue Ribbon Committee signaled that Walmart's move into the city was inevitable, we were able to work through a number of concessions and accommodations. And just to list them, this all played out for anybody who was here through a very fierce public process across the city. Walmart was trying to get in at this scale in an urban setting, but what we were able to manage in terms of at least a healthier response is to preserve the street grid running through this, to create sidewalks with bollards that would preserve the pedestrian realm, to create covered and tree-shaded transit stops, so those who were actually coming to Walmart, and we know the statistics on the very low vehicle ownership rate in the city of New Orleans, that one could actually get to this location. So outdoor covered seating for employees on break, pedestrian walks through the parking lot, and the preservation of mature live oak trees. And I can't resist sharing this photo of the RTA bus announcing Walmart as a place destination on a bus route in the city of New Orleans. This isn't exactly Tennessee Williams and Streetcar Named Desire, but we don't live in a perfect world. And if we can meet people where they are and what they need, then we feel like we are creating a healthier community. And that's the one counterintuitive example. Another that I'll share, and this actually I will just talk about because I'm afraid to go back. I'm not going to get these images. But anyway, this one is from Tulane Days, and especially over the 10-year period, most of which was spent rebuilding the campus after Katrina. We did rebuild the campus for health, and it's certainly easier in the context of a university campus where you have a certain containment and definition of place, and also resources that wouldn't be available in some other context. But the reason why I bring that example up is that one of the projects, probably the one for which I might be known, I'll go back. Let's see if I can do this. Resources are clearly more ample in that setting. But that, in fact, creating a pedestrian way through the center of Tulane campus met heated resistance. And my children learned the word communist by the blogs that called me a communist for advocating the removal of cars from the center of campus. This had been a linear parking lot and loading and vehicle cut-through in the neighborhood, and it did appear radical in people's mind that this would become pedestrian. But in any case, on a daily basis, as this did occur and we were successful, not only is it filled with walkers, bikers, skateboarders, but also chalkers who are scrawling announcements and basically communicating in this very healthy community way in what we call this pedestrian blacktop. So another example to share with you of urban design and fostering community health. The last example is from my position now at Eskew Dumez and Ripple, the firm which is recognized nationally, but has always taken it as its mission to act locally. And the example here that you're seeing in the little orange circle, or the sort of ochre-colored, yellow. This is in the middle of the bowl of New Orleans. This particular place was under 6 feet of water during Katrina. It's the site of the Keller Library in the Broadmoor neighborhood. And you wouldn't necessarily, in thinking about a place that could be 6 feet underwater, think of it at face value as being a healthy condition. But the firm and many of the staff members live there. Kurt Hagstedt, one of the principals, lived there, joined hand in hand with this community when they said, not only, some of you may know of a very famous map that was done right after Katrina with a giant green dot that said, this will return to nature. Well, it happened to be where all these people lived, and they were determined not to have their neighborhood be green dotted out of existence. And the rallying place was this library site. And as you can see, it's a vibrant place from these photos, and it's that way all the time. It's a place of educational access. It's a place of community gathering. They ironically named the cafe that they wanted as part of the program the Green Dot Cafe. There's a farmer's market that is there on Tuesdays. And in this case, we're not just talking about health, but the very existence of a whole community that the firm was very pleased to work with. And I think lastly, how are we doing on time? Good. So I'm just going to, with maybe one more minute, I'm just sharing this. This is not. This is just out of the enthusiasm, the obvious gain of community health whenever a new park is introduced into the city. And this, if you have an opportunity to visit it, is Crescent Park on the Mississippi Riverfront. It's part of a 6-mile-long master plan that our firm promoted and realized for the city of New Orleans. And this is the first piece of it, a 1.4-mile-long park on the river. It is, as the former planning director and before Katrina, knowing that despite the visibility of trees and green space, there are many stretches of the city that are deficient in open spaces. And with parks like Crescent Park, like the Lafitte Greenway, little parklets right down here in the emerging downtown neighborhood, there is so much exciting new work and projects being realized here that build community. So in closing, people will find, that's a photo of Crescent Park, looking back to the skyline of the city, and I do hope that you'll have time to visit it. So, in closing, people are going to find their way to build community through the public realm, through streets and places. They will figure out ways to connect their homes, their jobs, their schools, their grocery stores, churches, playgrounds, and parks. And in my mind, the work of the urbanists is to make those connections better, more direct, more respectful, more uplifting as we continue to foster the health of our urban community. Thank you.
So it's really interesting. So one of the things that popped into my mind when you were showing that bus with Walmart and then, of course, Streetcar Named Desire, what a contrast. I mean, what happened to New Orleans? It's real. How you've been here for how long? And are you a native?
I can't claim this as a place I was born, but my parents were here of many generations. We just I happened to be born on Air Force Base. But let's say by the time I was 8, I managed to find my way back. So.
But you also mentioned that you were a child in the Netherlands, so in a water environment. So you have some very interesting ideas about that, which we'll come to later. But I wanted to ask you about the Walmart. When was that built?
That was completed in approximately 2003.
2003. So was that one of the first of such projects?
It was absolutely. At the time, we did research to find out. At the time, Walmart was doing two things. They had all their suburban stores. We all know the model. And they figured out the way to increase their market share was to do small neighborhood markets, but then try to enter into with the super Walmarts in an urban setting. The only one that had been done was in South America. There was no other in the United States at that time. So it really was. They were very determined to get here as breaking ground. And it was very consuming for the community in terms of knowing that this city has double the national rate of people, working households without access to vehicles. So it was this very difficult accommodation because people with a very limited means would have to take a cab out to the Walmart in the surrounding parish, suburban areas, to try to get things at an affordable price. So there were just so many issues of social equity involved with this. There were, of course, dire predictions about the ripple effect on local retail. Those were not realized. There were fears. And so really what we were doing is working hard at making this behave, if you will, in an urban way to meet this community and its profile. And I like to show these. They're messier photographs, but they're ones where you see that, and if you go to that Walmart and you see employees who are sitting undercover having lunch, and you see people under a shade tree catching a bus, and you see people tie up their motorcycle and bikes and put their groceries over the handlebars to ride home. These are accomplishments. And so, the world isn't perfect. It's not like in the movies.
So this is really fascinating because when Walmart moves in, other big boxes move in, and then there goes the neighborhood and the city and the world. And what you have done, which is really, really significant here, is that first of all you kept it to an urban size. You persuaded them somehow to keep it to an urban size. But not only that, but to sort of stop it from spreading. So what were the key moves that you had to make so that it protected the neighborhood, the community, took care of the needs of the community, but didn't blow it out into some sort of a mega development?
There were probably at least 3 factors in this case that helped in that regard. One is that the scale of the Walmart, and this was a moment that was difficult for me actually, was the figure ground of a Walmart superstore on Chapatulas, if you know the city. That is the warehouse district adjoining the port. And actually, if you compared the scale of that as a warehouse to the warehouse district, it wasn't an outlier. It was the parking, and we needed to make that work, but the actual size of the building was not outside of the realm. So that was one consideration that made it easier in terms of scale. The second thing is one reason, and this is probably the much more significant. As I said, it was about 2003. Small note, we also worked on zoning regulations that would, again, address the idea of these big boxes coming into the urban setting. So from a zoning regulatory point of view, we were really focused on trying to get that right. Then the third is that Katrina hit. And if those who lived through that know that not only did national retailers run, but many of them just didn't come back to where they were. Now, this store did reopen, but for many years we bought time in terms of what might have happened if we hadn't been struck by that storm at that point. And I think so many other ideas about urban development have come to the city as a result of Katrina that we don't have to really deal with it in the same way as we might have.
Well, that's excellent. We will return to this zoning question because that's always a contention everywhere. It can't be changed, it can't be changed. You change it. There are ways to do that. So, and you have proved it. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Sandy Stroud. My company is Urban Focus. We work here, and we have offices in New Orleans and in Washington, D.C. We work all over the country. We assist in bringing together all the complicated components to make effective and productive development projects, working with cities, communities, private owners all over the country. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my idea of what communities that learn look like. From my perspective, communities that learn require more than a more challenging approach to development and have the following components. Although challenging to develop, these projects are more viable and thoughtful long term, and I'll just go through each of these headlines. Communities that learn are sustainable in many ways and address the needs of the project, not just from the three-legged stool that we all know, but more importantly, the overlay of economics with social justice, the environment, and local demand. Solutions are local and global at the same time, and this overlay is really where I operate. Communities that learn have many partners. From arts groups and advocacy groups in our project in Jacksonville, this is an example, to political partners, funders, and so many other stakeholders, it's not news to you, I'm sure, or I hope, that the needs and expectations of the many need to be considered and addressed. Communities that learn are incremental. Having many stakeholders means serving many masters. While catalytic and impactful projects can be part of a successful development, the impacts must be considered. Too often, increasing property values in the tax base, a priority of the city, takes precedence, but there is a counter concern about preserving and growing the culture and richness of a community. In our project in Jacksonville, Florida, we were hired to prepare a feasibility study on the viability of developing an arts-related district downtown with live-work art space in their core, which currently had about 20 vacant properties that the city owned, historic vacant properties that the city owned. Building off of and reinforcing existing momentum in the Jacksonville example, we followed the lead of their off-the-grid program. They had created a program through their bid and their arts council where they were putting artists into vacant retail spaces in the downtown core at very low cost or no cost rents while they're sitting vacant, which created some activity and opportunity downtown, created an art walk. It was already starting to build momentum. We studied that those off-the-grid locations, which is the small map on the bottom right, as part of the larger study, and then we proposed some larger, more impactful development projects for the core. We concentrated our efforts and theirs to areas already showing momentum, and we told them to move all of their off-the-grid efforts to first-floor commercial along these corridors to make them more visible. They had actually put some in office buildings, anywhere they could. So we wanted them all to line these two main roads, and then those nodes were where the buildings were located that we were looking at developing arts-related developments in. The pictures on the left show two of the projects we proposed. The one on the bottom was a proposal for Jacksonville University to put their theater and production studio right at that intersection downtown. So that was the prime location for the project. In Mount Pleasant, Washington, D.C., they've done a great job of showing a two-stage solution to revitalization. When the historic public library was in renovation, the city opened a temporary library in a vacant storefront on this 7-block long corridor. They provided free wireless and computers and created a light, airy space central to the neighborhood. And ultimately, once the library was renovated, the storefront became a Thai restaurant. Once visualized as an active, clean space, it became an attractive opportunity. In this same neighborhood, communities that learn serve local markets and reflect local culture. In this same neighborhood, we were part of a team hired by the city to prepare a retail market study and a development strategy for this 7-block-long district. It's a challenging retail corridor because it's surrounded by 3 major retail nodes, Adams Morgan, Columbia Heights, and Cleveland Park, which all are very wealthy, vibrant commercial corridors in the city. On paper, it doesn't look like it should thrive, and in fact, our retail market analyst didn't believe it was thriving before she visited it. But in reality, it's an active and unique street with multiple mercados, restaurants, coffee shops, jewelry stores, dentists, and a bakery. We discovered that what was called the informal economy, I don't know if you can see that middle slide very well, it kind of fades out. There was actually unaccounted demand that was being addressed by Central and South American immigrants, both legal and illegal, who are propping up the local economy. The less than Class A retail space on the second floors and basements of this neighborhood were creating a thriving market of businesses, almost in spite of the formal economy. This information actually bolstered the Latino Business Association and provided them with vital information to see how important their businesses were to the success of this commercial district. In this market, New Orleans, this is a map. Actually, Richard Campanella created this map initially and let me co-opt it, showing the migration patterns of the Creole community in New Orleans. In New Orleans, we're pursuing a project, my team is pursuing a project, that in an area that was originally part of or historically a settlement for the Creole population in New Orleans. This map shows that migration up into the 7th Ward in the early 20th century. We're demonstrating that the Creole-centric businesses that currently exist and existed here, it's hard to see the little names, but they're all in different colors because of their status, in the past are part of a campaign to promote a cultural district and our own retail area in our project. Our partner, Vance Vaucresson, is the head of a 4th-generation sausage-making family, a deeply entrenched Creole family. His father owned the first African-American business on Bourbon Street, and his businesses served hot sausage po' boys at every jazz festival since the beginning. His business was based in this 7th Ward neighborhood before it was destroyed by the floods following Katrina. So we're proposing to draw on that Creole culture and make an active ground floor in a multifamily building that we're developing in this neighborhood, where the Vaucresson family wants to reopen their business in its original location as a sandwich shop serving hot sausage po' boys. We are also proposing a Creole archive for a portion of the ground floor, similar to the temporary library I showed you earlier, an active, accessible venue with free wireless and comfy chairs. So again, another component of communities that learn, manage investments, and preserve affordability. This is the U Street district in Washington, D.C. This was an African-American commercial corridor during the era of segregation in the early 20th century and beyond. It has a fantastic cultural history, from Duke Ellington and Pearl Bailey playing nearby clubs, to the White Law Hotel on 12th Street, and the Dunbar on 15th, which housed African-American musicians who came to town, to Ben's Chili Bowl, where only Bill Crosby and the President of the United States eat free, to the D.C. riots and the drug wars, to a very active and vibrant center. This slide shows some examples of dramatic changes in this neighborhood over the past 10 years. From small-scale rooftop additions to dramatic, full-blown new construction. This area was the beta test for inclusionary zoning in the District of Columbia, which requires 10% of all residential buildings built over 15 units must be affordable to 80% of area median income, which is actually pretty high in the District of Columbia. Beyond that, scale has also been an issue. The overall planning and visioning is dramatic in this area. It's a delicate balance in danger of losing its appeal by being overbuilt. It's challenging to manage because the market values in this area are booming. Currently, condominiums sell for $750 a square foot in this neighborhood. So back in New Orleans, managing investment and preserving affordability is also the topic. This is currently part of the discussion as New Orleans contemplates its new comprehensive zoning ordinance. This slide shows what is known as the trapezoid. It's an area in New Orleans designated through the redevelopment plans for both the Lafitte and Iberville public housing redevelopments, which plan for 2,000 plus off-site replacement units as they redevelop these two public housing projects. Simultaneously, the city is going through its comprehensive zoning ordinance, has changed the zoning in this area to substantially limit where multifamily housing can be permitted. The map on the right shows in red the areas where multifamily housing is not permitted in the old zoning, and in the new zoning, the area on the left shows where it's prohibited in the new zoning. These two city and municipal agencies are working at cross purposes currently, and I'm hoping we can help them resolve the problem. So this slide tries to define the plays in the market at each stage of growth and the various roles of different stakeholders in the process. In a stagnant market, the drivers of change are the public sector and the nonprofits and philanthropic entities. In a growth market, these same entities continue to promote affordability and encourage investment. It should be easier at this point. In a stabilized market, the roles change. The private sector begins to direct investment, and the philanthropic, nonprofit, and public sectors need to preserve affordability and manage scale, and push back on growth to preserve the value and culture that's there. I'm going to quickly jump through a couple of these. These are a couple more examples of leveraging investment. This is Popularize. It's a project in DC, where the neighborhood was able to vote on what they wanted. They can vote on what they want at particular sites. And once there is a number of votes on particular topics, then they can aggregate these votes and determine, it helps the developer determine what should be placed there. It's sort of like Neighborland, if anybody's familiar with Candy Chang's project, to ask the public what their interest is. Then there's also Fundrise, which is an opportunity for these same public offerings to be made and ask investors, crowdsource basically, for development projects. In DC, Fundrise has been used to open a Japanese restaurant on H Street. With a $100 investment, the developers offered a share of the 30% return. With additional investment, the perks become tangible, including private dinners with the chef. So this is again in New Orleans. We have been working with the capital absorption process, designed by Living Cities and David Wood from the Initiative for Responsible Investment at Harvard. It's a self-assessment tool we have taken on as local stakeholders to determine our ability to process and spend our capital and leverage it properly in projects. Through these 5 categories, a large group of stakeholders work over a 6 to 8 month period to assess our ability to absorb, leverage, and process investments. Out of this process, we came up with a bunch of action items. One of this is a one-table process that Flozell will mention, which is a development funding process where all of the city agencies work together, and you come to them with your project, and they all work together to try to figure out how to make it happen and leverage their own funding sources. Another one is capacity building. I'm currently working with UNO on a community development finance program for professionals. And a third is to commit to developing clear and useful data tools so that data-based decisions are made. So finally, this is just an example of the market valuation assessment. The City of New Orleans commissioned the Reinvestment Fund out of Philadelphia to create this analysis. It's a 30-page long document mapping the demographics of the city through home ownership, residential sales, occupancy, vacancy, other types of data, so that we can start to see where the edges of growth and investment are in the city. It's helping to inform how both public and private investment is being placed so we can take advantage of that momentum that's already created. So development projects that address all of these concerns are not easy. It takes a village, as they say, but it's a recipe for true sustainability that serves both local and global concerns. Thank you.
Sandy, you left us a few seconds for a question.
Sorry.
But can we dig into the crowdsourcing a little bit? What was your method? What did you use for crowdsourcing for these development
Well,
projects?
I didn't actually, that one example is not my personal example.
Okay.
That's an example of a developer in DC that's doing this, and it's becoming kind of, people are starting to watch it to see how it's working. They've done it on this one project. They're considering, they actually have more investment than they have projects, as I understand it right now, because people are interested in what they're doing.
So the developer, is that kind of a biased thing? Is that self-serving for the developer?
Of course.
How do we get...
Well, I guess the way I would put it is it's no different from a market study,
Okay.
in the sense that you're trying to grab the momentum that's there. What's beautiful to me about it is that you're creating momentum from the beginning. People are starting to talk. Because crowdsourcing is such a new method of fundraising, it's creating buzz even before you talk about what the project is. And then once you start talking about the project, people are paying attention. So that may not last forever.
Right.
You get that kind of momentum, but these early projects are really getting a boost from just being the early project.
So it's social media, it's community meetings, it's all of the
Right.
above, all of those things.
It's that same kind of building off of what's already happening.
Okay. Well, if our next speaker is involved, they'll be straightened out. There you go.
Good afternoon. Let's see here if we can. My name is Flozell Daniels, Jr., and as was said earlier, I'm with the Foundation for Louisiana, where our mission is to invest in people and practices that work to both reduce vulnerability and build stronger, more sustainable communities. And I am extremely pleased to be here with you today to share a bit in this Green Build opportunity and to talk a bit about our work in building resilient communities. It's been exciting over the last 9+ years to develop a community investment practice, really to some of the ends that Colette and Sandy discussed. And I want to share a bit about who we are and the work we do, and then some of the values that we bring into this space. We originally were created 6 days after Katrina hit the shores of Louisiana, as was mentioned earlier, the Louisiana Disaster Recovery Foundation. And from the very beginning, we wanted to use a set of values that are deeply steeped in equity and inclusion to build a stronger, more resilient community after what was one of the world's largest catastrophes. And in this disaster recovery and community development context, we were able to leverage more than $30 million in direct investment into more than $250 million in outcomes, including some 10,000 plus affordable, safe homes, both home ownership and rental, and really working to stoke local economies by helping micro and small businesses come back to life so that people could get back to work and what have you, and all the while developing a very real and authentic connection between civic engagement, public policy, and the built environment through practices like holding convenings, really bringing people into planning processes, the CZO, the master plan, and other things that you all probably know about here, and also developing user-friendly, hands-on toolkits and documents that help people participate in the democratic decision-making that was most impacting them, their families, and their communities. If you go to our website, you'll see we have citizens' guides for things like land use and urban design, in addition to toolkits, really hands-on documents that let people work on issues such as blight eradication in their neighborhoods. And one of my favorite is a toolkit that's focused on equitable development and what everyday folks can do to participate from a civic design perspective in those discussions. In that context, the development of our, what was then called the Program-Related Investment Fund, took place, and it is now the Community Investment Fund. And it has become, for 6 years now, an outcome of our, I haven't been moving these forward, have I? There we go. An outcome of the work that we do. And if you see at this slide here, you can tell a bit of our evolution in the work, moving beyond the equitable disaster framework, really looking at infrastructure investing and thinking about how do we catalyze sustainable development in this context of being a learning space in delivering healthier outcomes. What we've learned is the importance of community development finance models are critical. They must be responsive to an evolving, shifting sands environment. And some of what we heard in these discussions with our grantees, community partners across multiple sectors, public, private, philanthropy, nonprofit, and the community, is that we need alternative strategies to finance this incredible work that needs to move forward in the disaster space and beyond. So a bit of a framework for this notion of community-driven financing, and as you can see, there's a sort of eternal loop that happens between the opportunity for us to engage people in conversations across all the sectors that I mentioned, the opportunity to create and sustain and evolve and change policy work that involves equitable development and creates healthier communities, and the kinds of investments in small business, housing, and community development where we bring capital to the table to do that. As it relates to this conversation, our frame for this work is really leading and supporting equitable community development as a sustainable approach to well-being. And we thought a lot about this with our partner, the Kellogg Foundation, and others. And in this way, we use some of the framing values in defining health from an outcomes perspective. This notion of food and cultural food practices as a primary source of strength, resilience, and well-being. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out in New Orleans, food culture is a huge issue in that way. Food systems that are owned and controlled by members of community. Food systems that create jobs, access, and that prioritize local sourcing. And we seek at-scale opportunities to shift consumption behavior with an emphasis on children and families. And underlying all of those interests and values is this notion of expanding economic opportunity as a way of really creating sustainable and durable health outcomes in a community that actually has the capacity to learn. As you can see here, this is some of the places, there we go, where our funding and investments show up. Housing and reconstruction, commercial real estate, working capital and bridge loans have shown up later in the space as it relates to what nonprofits need and how we're responding to input from communities in this space. And one of the really exciting things, Sandy mentioned this earlier, with regard to the capital absorption project, the one table recommendation, and it really is a space where we're now thinking about what the next generation of infrastructure is for community development, finance, all of it really geared towards creating more opportunity for low and moderate income families and really revitalizing underserved communities by bringing all of the investment partners across those sectors, public and private, developers, nonprofits, and the community space to enhance our ability to attract and deploy capital in much more effective ways than we historically have. What I'd like to share for a few moments is a few examples of how our notion of partnership philanthropy can actually help move projects that matter in this space. One of the ones that we're most proud of is the Refresh Project. I would certainly, this is over on the historic Broad Street area here in New Orleans. And this has been an amazing opportunity for the Foundation for Louisiana. It started with an investment in a Main Street project with our partners at Broad Community Connections, really imagining and thinking about the Broad Street area and what would it look like to revitalize that community. We were fortunate enough to not only make that grant, but partner in thinking about the use of this particular property. It was, at the time, an abandoned grocery store, and this is in a community that was not only a food desert, but a job and opportunity desert. And we began the long work of building out the vision and the partnership for that. We really rounded that first grant with a second grant that allowed us to get site control, to continue to build partners, and ultimately to do capital formation, attracting both public and private investment with a $500,000 program-related investment from the foundation to build this amazing facility that is now anchored by a 365 Whole Foods grocery partner. And so it's not only no longer a food desert, but it has nation-leading sales. I think someone mentioned earlier this notion of the informal economy. It's doing exceptionally well. It really does have affordable staples and nation-leading local sourcing of food, even higher than their California market, and super important to us, local good-paying jobs. And it has other partners in that space, such as Liberty's Kitchen, which is primarily a very successful job training and life turnaround organization for opportunity youth that also serves some of the best food you'll ever find. And the Gold Ring Center for Culinary Medicine, again, a partnership with my beloved Tulane University, my alma mater, first of its kind learning space for physicians, chefs, and community members using food culture and practice to deliver unprecedented and durable health outcomes. You'll also find charter management organizations, community gardening organizations in that space. And as you can tell, it's not only become a source of healthy food that's affordable, but it really has become a community hub and a community destination. Revolution Foods, this goes back to the comment I made earlier about the desire to get to scale. This is a national business. This is actually a for-profit company that we invested in who has a model that expands access to healthy food into schools. We were very interested in this notion of changing behavior with young people and their families, going to scale. There are thousands and thousands of meals served across dozens of charter schools, both in the New Orleans area and across the region. And we were really fortunate to play a role in providing financing to bring them into this market, to connect them with the local labor market that was able to get that work done, people with experience, and that work is really moving forward, and we're most excited about it. And really last, and maybe as a way to transition into my colleague Jonathan, the Jack and Jake's Project, which is an amazing reuse. We entered into this conversation thinking about how could we invest in an organization that already had built a successful wholesale and distribution model, and they were interested in testing the opportunity to bring that to retail, sort of buying down the cost of that food and having a real connection to local sources for that food within the region, which really was an amazing opportunity for us. Jonathan will get into the details of the actual development and the capital and things of that nature. As I close, I just want to really challenge and ask you all to think, as you move this work forward and thinking about communities that learn and healthier outcomes, to really consider the opportunity to be much more intentional about this notion of inclusion and what we mean from a civic design perspective and how people actually engage. That has been some of the most amazing but challenging work that we've endeavored in this particular space, and considerations of equity and how they get defined in the space. What does it mean from an outcome perspective? As Colette said, not being able to define those outcomes, but being very intentional about looking at those things. And, of course, the science of well-being and notions of influence and power. This is a political space we live in, even in private development. What does it mean for those of you who have the expertise and do this work to be to think about those things and to bring your expertise in with those values to create better outcomes? I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks for having me, and I hope you guys have a great conference.
So, Flozell, can you, just so that I understand, the foundation is financed by whom?
The foundation is financed in partnership with large national and regional funders, individual donors. We are now actually bridging out, especially with our community investment fund, attracting investment from the public sector, and also regular everyday individuals. We still get small gifts, as we did right after the disaster, to help support this work.
So do you actually have to do like fundraising events and all of that to keep it going?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, we are a grant-making public charity, technically, according to the IRS.
Okay. So it was the hurricane that really sort of spawned all of this activity, right?
It was an unprecedented opportunity. We did not have the infrastructure in the world of philanthropy to approach a community development and people development model with an emphasis on equity and inclusion and really delivering outcomes for people who are typically underserved before Hurricane Katrina hit. I don't typically like the silver lining thing that people say, but really it was a silver lining in what was a terrible catastrophe.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm listening to is that you obviously, many of you have a real deep connection to the local university here. And it's big and it's important and it's personal and it's emotional and it's all of those things. And so do a lot of other people who live around here. How useful is it for all of you to think about connecting with the knowledge groups at the university so that they can help you do your work? So, Flozell, I'll start with you.
You know, it's an interesting question. I just made a presentation on community resilience in the disaster context that really was a broader conversation about global advancements. One of the things that we discussed, and it was folks from New Orleans, people from Tokyo, and other places, was the need for us to stay connected to our universities and our knowledge centers, how exceptional a job we do when we do stay connected. And so I think it's a very consistent theme that every community can probably speak to. I think there is, though, a responsibility, and there has to be a tempering of that engagement because universities are large, powerful organizations that sometimes don't act on behalf of the community. That's not a negative thing. It is just a way of thinking about how to more creatively and effectively do the work.
So on the projects that you're working on with all these resources that New Orleans has, the food, incredible food, the incredible culture, and all of this, I mean, you as the foundation need to take the leadership, correct, in some of these projects? Or who takes the leadership?
Well, often we take the leadership, but we've also seen an enormous amount of community wisdom and partnerships and folks who come to us. And I think this is a part of what Jonathan will talk about, who already are leading in their space, who already see the vision and opportunity, whether it's to repurpose a building or to advance a project that delivers healthier outcomes. And we sometimes either become the grease, the lubricant that helps it move, but more often than not, we have a very hands-on approach because that's what this work has looked like to be effective. And the last thing I'll mention in that context is we also very actively and intentionally bring the voice of people who typically can't come to those tables in the negotiation. And this is part of the reason why the community development finance space is so important, because where the resources are being invested is where the decisions are being made. So it gives us some power on behalf of communities that we serve, learn from, and partner with to actually bring those values into the development space.
So there needs to be a champion for those communities, which probably sometimes comes from the community, but sometimes it has to be applied from the outside.
It's both and. What we've learned is across these sectors, everyone else has a champion or can champion themselves. And so community really has to be specific and intentional about partnering so that it can build power, understand these issues. This is why the documents, the toolkits, and things are so important to us, because we know people know and understand what they need for them, their families, their communities, their neighborhoods. What they really need is the energy and the space and the channel to be able to influence the way those decisions get made in ways that we think create more durable, sustainable communities that work for everyone.
Okay. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Light. I run the New Orleans office for a group called Alembic Community Development, which is headquartered in New York, and I came here in 2007, post-Katrina, to start our work here, which has continued in New Orleans and in Mississippi. I think my role in this panel is to drill down a bit deeper through a case study that touches on public health issues and how the built environment and more visionary ideas can kind of come together in balance of vision and feasibility. This project is the adaptive reuse of a 35,000 square foot, 100-year-old school building that was formerly blighted for about 10 years, and we are currently repurposing into a fresh food market, as well as artist exhibition space and small business nonprofit office space. By a quick show of hands, who is not from New Orleans here in the room? Okay, excellent. So I'll spend a minute just defining some terms and situating so that you have a bit of context that you might not otherwise. Again, I think what's exciting about this is that oftentimes in real estate or just in community development in general, you have one side of the spectrum that is vision and visionaries, and they get critiqued for living a little bit too happily in the clouds. On the other side, you have the feasibility, the realist people who get criticized for being a bit too grumpy and bottom-line driven. And I think in order to affect public health outcomes, positive public health outcomes through projects, you need a bit of both. And there's sometimes a false choice set up between feasibility and vision. But really, again, impactful projects marry the two of them. This building is situated in a neighborhood called Central City in New Orleans, which is about 5 minutes from here. Central City is aptly named because of its location within the city, bordering the Central Business District, Uptown, and some higher wealth neighborhoods. It's an historic immigrant African-American neighborhood that has seen the familiar story of decline, white flight, redlining, and other factors that contributed to it being disinvested over several of the second part of the 20th century, in particular in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Despite that, though, or perhaps because of that, particularly post-Katrina, there's been a real concerted effort by philanthropy, by public sector, and by others to reinvest and to really help this neighborhood come back in a way that it was formerly, but also in a new way as well. I think it's become a bit of a prerequisite to be part of this project. You have to have a somewhat inscrutable name. So our own name, Alembic Community Development, we are the owner and developer. Our operator is a group called Jack and Jake's Food Market. Jack and Jake's were the names of two mules that the owner's great uncle owned on a small island in the middle of the Mississippi River, about an hour north of here, sometime in the mid-20th century. Separately, we had this name, Myrtle Banks. The name of this building is called the Myrtle Banks Building. That's because it was renamed in the 1980s for an educator and principal whose name was Myrtle Rosabella Banks. And we had very much wanted to honor that history by continuing that name. And then lastly, the name of the street on which it's situated is Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard, or shortened as O.C. Haley Boulevard. It is one of a few targeted commercial corridors here in the city of New Orleans that have really gotten the buzz in both positive and sometimes a little bit worrying ways, but is a place that's been really targeted for reinvestment. Aretha Castle Haley was a civil rights activist in the 1960s who was quite active in Central City and in citywide as well. What you'll see here are some images of the building itself. So a very brief history. It was built in 1910 by a quite prolific city architect, E.A. Christie. It operated as a school until 2002. 2002 it was shuttered by the school board. It sat vacant until 2008. In 2008, you can see in the upper left of this slide, there was a major fire set, which brought the roof from the third floor basically onto the second floor and severely damaged it. Over 3 years, it continued to deteriorate through water damage, exposure to the elements, hurricanes, tropical storms, etc. We bought it in 2011. I spent 2 years putting together programming, design team, community engagement, financing, of course, and tenant roster. And now we have completed construction. It was about a 15, 16-month construction process. So all told, about 3.5 years brings us up to the present. For the architects and others interested in the room, you can see this is just a very highlighted version of the life cycle of the construction. Effectively, we brought the entire interior, was entirely gutted, and we completely reframed. But at the midpoint of the construction, we were left with 4 masonry walls. That photo shows a slab. In the end, we actually had to redo the slab, so it was literally 4 walls and a pile of dirt that we have now recreated in kind in conformance with the Department of Interior standards for historic rehabilitation in order to generate historic tax credits. I have to pause here just for an important, I think, caveat about this, that this market is not yet open, and I'm a natural skeptic. So if I were in the audience, I might ask, well, why are you talking about a case study that's not yet opened and happened? And I think my response to that is that there's a lot of value in understanding projects, both the beginning, middle, and end. And some of the other presenters maybe alluded to, not everything, obviously, is rosy and perfect. And so we're in the midst of this. We have completed construction. We're about 6 weeks away from opening, and our operator currently is building out the space. One of the reasons I asked about who was from here is that I would hope that when we had this conference, everyone would be able to go afterwards and go shop there. But all that means is that you are committed now to return to New Orleans and come back and shop when it does, in fact, open in a few weeks. Lastly, about this area is that this was very much intentionally a place where we cited this project. The disinvestment and decline of the neighborhood is not a place where you take retailers, you take investors, and they look around and say, great, I see a lot of rooftops, I see a lot of income potential, I see a lot of educational attainment, which are the key metrics that they look for when the private sector puts in money. What we got to show was a lot of potential and a lot of trajectory. And that is a challenge, but that is an important one. And I think what we were able to do was to help people see beyond existing condition and see that in low-income areas there is, 1, a lot of wealth still, and 2, there is a lot of infrastructure that is still there. There's a lot of history, and there is a lot of potential in which people can build. And that has really been the focus of what we've tried to do by bringing this store here. We had several objectives in doing this. Obviously, fresh food access was a major part of that. Historically, there are several efforts to move people from high poverty areas into lower poverty areas in order to provide them with resources and opportunities that way. Now, more recently, and we certainly bought into this, you can provide resources, you can provide amenities, benefits, things that communities need in those places directly and not uproot folks. Secondly, this is about economic development. This is a major opportunity to create jobs, and not just stock or cashier jobs, but middle management jobs, team lead jobs, upper management. We've had a major focus on local hiring. And when I say local hiring, I mean not just in the city of New Orleans, but literally Central City itself. This, again, just a sense of its proximity. It's in the lower left, relation to downtown. And so literally you can be at this site in about 5 minutes from here. Projects like this absolutely do not come close to happening without development partners, and you see the logos of many of them. I like to highlight one in particular, and then talk a bit about a second. First is our operator. Again, you don't bring a Walmart, you don't bring a Whole Foods to neighborhoods like this, except in some rare circumstances. We were in this position where we were looking for an alternative model. We were looking for a single operator who had the opportunity to address accessibility, affordability, and really brought a social mission and a purpose in addition to economic bottom line thinking that they needed to make operations be sustainable. And I think Sandy touched on this earlier. This is critical. In neighborhoods like this, public sector philanthropy set the stage. They set policy. They create incentives. But then ultimately you need private sector. You need private sector to come to buy into a set of policies and literally to be incentivized. And that is how projects like this can happen. Jack and Jake's, I think, is a great example of this. They're a relatively nascent, relatively new startup that has been wholesaling for about 4 years now to public schools, restaurants, hospitals, and others. And this will be their first foray into retail. And this was very much an intentional move to go into an underserved area and to be a part of the private sector move that was bringing investment, bringing fresh food access to this neighborhood. Several other partners made this happen. Funding partners, one of which we have on the stage, you just heard from Flozell. I will say funding sources, if you treat them as sources, they will be that. You need to treat funding sources as partners because that's what they are. And again, to deliver a project like this, what you need is everyone buying into your shared vision. Neighborhood organizations. Neighborhood organizations are critical. We didn't treat community engagement as a check of the box, something that you need to do in your development process. I actually saw it mostly as we are reaching out to potential customers. We need to be serving Central City residents, and so what better way than through community engagement from day one of the project to have buy-in, to have their influence over the project, and to have a real sense of what the needs were, and if we were opening a retail operation, what were people going to buy? What was going to bring them into the store? Perhaps just to get into now the lessons learned of it, of the project thus far, I think what we've done most successfully is identified resources and assets, and then we've connected them, and then, of course, we've leveraged them. This is a photograph, an historic photograph of what formerly O.C. Haley Boulevard used to be called Dryad Street, and this is the same shot I took just a few weeks ago looking downtown, and you can see our building just down in the corner behind before you hit the cathedral. A few things you notice actually that are different. Of course, the streetcar. There was a streetcar there. There's not any longer. But we do have two wonderful bus lines, one of which you saw earlier has Walmart on the marquee, which I must say drives me crazy every single day. We are not, I would say, a direct competitor to Walmart. We hope to be a direct competitor. But the truth is that I know anecdotally, folks in Central City right now, that's where they go. They go to Walmart to shop. They take the bus, but they also take taxis. That's an immediate $7 surcharge each way to go get your groceries. People also bicycle. One of the nice things about O.C. Haley Boulevard and having it being targeted by the city is that bike lanes are coming in. We have $1 million of streetscape coming in to the boulevard that will bring bike lanes and real opportunities for alternative public transportation. Two partnerships, again, I would like to specifically talk about. One is with the New Orleans Department of Health. As a developer, you don't typically think of the Department of Health as a partner to execute a real estate project, certainly an adaptive reuse of a 100-year-old school building. We were presented with an opportunity to partner with them on what's called a health impact assessment. And I was honestly a bit uncertain at first, and within a few conversations had really bought in. And now we've since completed about a 9-month process. A health impact assessment is something that's done around the country. It is essentially to look at a baseline for what exists in an area and then see how a new project will either positively, negatively, or perhaps without any impact affect a neighboring or surrounding community. We wanted to make sure that our project is going to have a positive health impact, and so this partnership with the Department of Health has been wonderful in really getting on the ground knowledge, data, hard data, quantitative and qualitative information about how this project can serve Central City and how it can thus sustain itself as a business. One of the nice features about the store once it opens, and you get a shot of it here on the upper left, is that there will be, the building is a ground floor and a mezzanine, and there will be a teaching kitchen upstairs. There are lots of ideas, and we actually had a full calendar of events about how do we program this teaching kitchen. And we got a tremendous amount of feedback from community residents through this health department assessment that said, no, I won't come to that. So that is when, you really kind of adapt on the fly and think, okay, well, we're in a good position where we did this ahead of time. And so let's readjust our programming and our education outreach, and let's make sure that it is, in fact, responsive to what people need and what people will come for. Another critical partnership with us is with an entity that is now called the Network for Economic Opportunity at the City of New Orleans. As I said, this is about economic development, and if we don't hit economic development goals, we have really missed an opportunity here. We wanted to make sure that as far as local hiring goes, there's not just opportunities, not just interviews, not just job fairs, but that there was training that goes along with that, and then there was preparation, there was follow-through. So about 2 weeks ago, we had a job fair with 200 residents attended that was targeted first for Central City. We did not have a citywide job fair at first. We started with Central City. And we had experts from the city and from, of course, the tenant Jack and Jake's on hand who were doing interviews, collecting resumes, information, and now are following through after that job fair to ensure that people who are qualified but may lack soft skills, customer service, et cetera, are getting training to augment what they already have. There is so much richness to share, and I see I'm out of a minute, so I will wrap up with a couple concluding thoughts. Dovetailing on what I just concluded around economic development, this project has been very much about food access, again, bringing retail food opportunities and healthy, affordable food to an underserved area. It's about the historic preservation, adaptive reuse of an historic building. It's about blight remediation, contributing to a revitalizing commercial corridor. All of that is trumped by jobs. Jobs to us has been, if you create jobs, right, you create opportunity for people in Central City. And as much as anything, that I think has been a focus from the beginning, and we've made sure that we've carried that through the entire development project. And that's not every real estate development, but that is one that we thought was critical for this to be successful. And then second and concluding thought is that when you're doing a project like this, and this goes to the topic of communities that learn, these must be iterative and reciprocal relationships. These are not the patriarchal approach to community building and development of kind of external and outside experts coming in just does not work. And so we have done, I think, very intentionally several, at so many key moments, just gone and listened to people. There are many ways to access organizations and networks. It's a lot more difficult to access residents, people who are not already engaged, people who are not civic leaders, people who are just living their lives. Those are the people in particular you already or always have to strive for. They're the ones who ultimately, I think, will support and sustain this project. Thank you very much.
So, Jonathan, the financing alone in this development must have been enormously complex.
Yes.
Because developers who are trying to do the right thing and make money and create jobs and all of the things that you talked about also have a bottom line, also have other responsibilities than just to the communities. So is there someone special or some groups that handle the financing for you guys, that putting together incredible packages for you? How does that get handled with your development company?
With ours, that was me. So we ended up raising...
Whoa.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Obviously with help. You never do anything alone. So we had a tremendous amount of help. We had several groups that provided counsel and guidance and such. But ultimately, as the developer, it's about you. You have to make something happen. So there was $14 million of funding that went to real estate, an additional $3.5 million that we raised to support Jack and Jake's and its build out and operations, and to make sure that it was sustainable. And again, you have to target the right people. We have new market tax credits, historic tax credits, funding from the city's redevelopment authority, funding from the state, funding from Foundation for Louisiana, funding from an entity called the Bio-Innovation Fund. The city has a wonderful fresh food retailer initiative program that contributed $1 million. You have to kind of know what your options are. You also have to know that with every financing source comes a series of constraints. And you have to be cognizant of what those constraints are, and you have to understand as a developer what you can work with and what you cannot.
So you're still healthy and alive, and no one has beaten you up yet, so it's working.
Yes.
It's working. So just to kind of round this out, what is your hope for the community that accrues around this place? Because I think, in addition to creating local jobs and creating great food possibilities, there's going to be a new community growing up around here. So what is your projection, your hope, your dream about that?
Mm-hmm. So we've been, like many people, concerned about gentrification in the area. If we build a new market and there are several other developments happening on this corridor, if they all come in and that results in displacement, that is not the objective, and that's certainly not our objective. And so I think there are numerous things that are happening. One is that we and others have partnered with nonprofits who are doing affordable housing in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, there's a pretty high rate of rental in the neighborhood as opposed to home ownership, which is not the case in other New Orleans neighborhoods. So we've worked, again, many more people than us have worked to create affordable housing and mixed income housing in the neighborhood to ensure that there's stability. There are other concerns about property tax increases, which are very real here in the city. So as a homeowner or as a renter, you're going to feel that increase. There are huge increases with the Sewage and Water Board, with electric here. So costs are going up. I think these are larger, obviously, structural questions. But all you can, I think we've laid a foundation for being mindful about that and for setting in some parameters around which there are certain kinds of developments that we're trying to support. And local hiring is a huge part of it. And that's why I think it's so paramount to real estate, even though to some people it's a bit tangential to it.
So after the next storm hits, what's the condition of this building? What happens? Is it on a low-lying ground, high ground? Where is it? And is it one of those future places in New Orleans that can survive?
One of the nice things about this, and one of the reasons it was feasible, is because it is not in a flood zone. It is high ground. That is one of the reasons I think that many people around the city have recognized that this is a smart place to put investment. We've weathered now many storms, and obviously now, though this is a 1910 building, we've come back with reinforcement. We could not have built this building again, I will say that. The way they built it in 1910 was incredibly impressive. So yes, it is a very secure asset from that standpoint.
So what's the basic structure of the building in 1910? Is it concrete? What is it?
Yes, yeah, so it's load-bearing masonry walls.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we come back with a wood and steel frame infrastructure.
Okay. So I think we're going to now dig down into the communities that learn part. So first of all, I'd like to ask anyone in the audience if you have some projects that you're working on that you'd like to talk about, some things that you are involved in, so that we can, and you need to come up to me because I'm the only one who has a mic. So come on up. Anyone? No one's working on anything? You're here for a reason. Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Chavez. I started a company in April. It's to bring in hemp products here, construction products. Everybody's really focusing on the medicinal and recreational part of it, but the low-lying diamond in the rut is the construction end of it, which we're not implementing here in Louisiana at all. So my dream and what I'm going to do is build the first hemp home here in Louisiana. And we're going to bring in viable products such as getting away from fiberglass installations in the homes that we're redoing. It's instead of using a fiberglass installation, we're going to be using hemp insulation. Why is hemp so important? It's a bioremediated plant, meaning that it doesn't steal from the earth, right? It gives back. 1 acre of hemp saves 4 acres of rainforest, which is crucially important. You know, we're basically killing our lungs of this planet with deforestation of the planet. So that's really important.
So it's a great commercial for hemp. I love it, and I think it's a wonderful thing. So where is the hemp grown?
It's actually grown in Canada. My business partner was part of the legislation being passed in Canada in the 70s to have it done. So he's very knowledgeable of it. So it's one of the agricultural crops that we want to bring here to Louisiana.
So Louisiana can support hemp growing?
Yes, it can, easily.
So it's farm jobs, it's industrial jobs, it's construction jobs you're talking about?
Yeah, not just that. We're talking about food sources. It's one of the seed itself from the hemp product is the greatest source of omega-3 fatty acids. So,
I thought it was the pot thing.
No, that's what we don't want to associate with. No, it's the actual hemp seed. It's the actual hemp seed. Yeah, so the cannabis has different strands of it. Depending on where it's grown is where the THC levels, if you're grown past the 45th parallel in colder weathers, the THC doesn't grow on the plant. it's the subtropical and tropical regions that the THC levels flourish on the plant.
So that means that New Orleans can have a little high here. Okay, so let's, anyone else in the audience? No. Okay, so the happy, healthy, yes, please come up and stand here so they could take a picture of you.
Hello, I'm David Whitty from Seattle, so also place friendly with cannabis. But my, I guess my question that I answered was the first one. In your community, what new and innovative measures have you seen to, those are someone else's questions. Okay, well, basically, I was in the Peace Corps for 2 years in Peru, and did a lot of community work with water and sanitation, and so I definitely feel the struggle of trying to get people's input from the community and really reaching out to get the voices that aren't heard, because a lot of times the people that show up at the community meetings are the ones with free time. And have time for a babysitter or money for a babysitter. So I guess, it's been really great hearing how all of the different projects have made an effort to get data from all the different sectors and really trying to not displace anyone. I guess my question for the panel is how do you deal with communities that are experiencing gentrification or having people or outsiders come in and there isn't a really sense of community yet? How do you have a community learn together that doesn't communicate together, that's very, doesn't talk to its neighbors? I feel like that's kind of a big struggle, and especially for me in Seattle, being a transplant, you're moving to places because they have this growing, I don't know, that they have something that draws people there. But once people are there, if there's no forum for them to communicate, how can you really have something that grows?
I can maybe talk to that a little bit. One thing that, I guess, another silver lining, which is a negative way to, I hate talking about it that way too, but the people who came to New Orleans came with a purpose post-Katrina. So there is a sort of a community. The transients actually created a community to some extent too, because nonprofits, it can't be overstated how much the nonprofits and volunteers helped the recovery. It can't be overstated. It was enormous. So there are certain areas of the city, Bywater is one of them that I would think of first as gentrifying, that also has a lot of the millennials, I guess is the term, but that are coming in, and there is a real strong sense of community basically out of that, the reasons they came. New Orleans also fosters an incredible devotion in the people who move here. You either love it or hate it, and the ones that hate it leave, and the ones that love it stay. And so there's this sort of commitment to making it great, which is pretty awesome. I don't think as a city we're very good at understanding preservation of affordability yet. That's not something, our learning curve has been post-Katrina in a lot of ways. We got a lot of people coming in with a lot of knowledge from other places and a lot of money coming in post-Katrina, and it gave us an opportunity to do a lot of things really fast. Maybe not as fast as we wanted, but it was an amazing amount of resources. And one thing that I think is important to note is that we don't have that level of resource anymore, so a lot of the conversations we're now having is how to be more productive with what we have, how to be more efficient, how to leverage things more creatively. That's what all of this discussion is about. And so I think what we're trying to start the conversation, what's starting to happen now is the commercial corridor development. We've always been talking housing, so the commercial corridor development has really become a conversation only in the last 2 years maybe, and this idea of preserving affordability. That's just been incredibly foreign. We just knew we needed housing, and so put up as much housing as you could possibly put up, and we don't yet really have a conversation about Have we overdone it with the affordable housing yet in certain neighborhoods? Are we competing with our market rate in certain neighborhoods? That's sort of what that market valuation analysis is about, because it shows you where those edges are. So you're not building affordable housing next to housing that's already affordable. You're building it in neighborhoods that don't have affordable housing yet.
So the actual sort of urban planning part of this is key, because you really need to analyze all the resources, all the areas within the city, so that you have a larger plan than just let's build affordable houses because that's what people need.
And I think it's also capacity. I mean, going back to the community development capacity building that came out of the capital absorption process, all of these universities that have come in, not just the local universities, but we've had a lot of other universities come here to help us get stronger. University of Pennsylvania, there's a lot of MIT grads here. There's been a lot of resources on that front. The training that happened after Katrina was kind of one-note training. It was very much about building housing in a disaster after a disaster. So now we have to talk about the bigger picture and sort of the economics of not now, but we've already started that, but it's a continuous conversation.
So this communities that learn is a really important issue. And one of the things that I keep worrying about is the way we kind of decimated the extended family in the 20th century. And communities somehow, I mean, when there's the young family suburbia, the weird swinging urbanite, the whatever is fine. The old folks are sort of thrown away in shore communities in New Jersey, and everybody's kind of living apart. So the community not only has to be built from what's there, but really rebuilt in a larger sense throughout America, because we kind of threw ourselves asunder and we are nowhere near forming a community. So what's the advice on that? I mean, I think, seniors have to be included with kids, with families. There needs to be an exchange of information.
So I think New Orleans offers a great counter example to that. New Orleans is such an intergenerational place. I moved here in 2007 from the Northeast in New York, and when you go out on a Saturday night to a club that you want to go see music in, and you will see people who are in their 80s down to people who are out with their kids. There are so many cultural aspects about New Orleans. There are the obvious ones like a jazz fest or Mardi Gras, but then on a more daily basis, there's just regular everyday living that is very inclusive, I think, of multi-generational activity. As a transplant myself, it's been wonderful to be a part of that.
I'd like to follow that as someone who has ancestors in St. Vincent de Paul Cemetery painting long ago, and I really appreciate a tiny little indicator of how social we are and how much we tend here to reinforce family and social connections. Remember this little thing about the global greenhouses built in the 9th Ward that are fabulous. In terms of sustainability, but there was this one little detail where the porches off of the back of the house were oriented in different ways because the design team said, well, we want everybody to have their privacy. And the community, those who moved in said,
I can't talk to my neighbors.
Well, they're all supposed to line up so we can talk to one another. So the idea that you build the public realm, you reinforce that, and at every level. The other indicator of this same thing, of the culture that is always reinforcing its collective and its sense of the greater self, is everyone thinks we're all related to one another, but the fact is it's because you're always talking to one another. Elsewhere, you wouldn't know that the fourth cousin once removed was related to you, but here we talk so much. And so that's why some of these discussions about the public realm and preserving these places is so important, because it's been there and we want to keep it. And there's just an impulse to do that. And it is always surprising in a way to go to other places and realize that doesn't happen.
Well, and I think to the gentleman's question, one of the things we're trying to answer here is how do we get data that informs that conversation for us, because both to Colette and Jonathan's point, we haven't had this issue of being spread out as much. Families have traditionally lived near and with each other in this space, and it's not just a cultural affect. It also is, in some ways, the construct of the economic disparity profile. And so people have always said, oh, I come to New Orleans, and even poor people seem to live well. Well, part of that is we've lived near each other, and people have been able to help each other.
Yeah.
What's being reported now is that gentrification, if you will, and no one's quite defined what we mean by that, right, is now disbanding communities and families and people who have always supported each other because of the shifting market. That's a good thing in many ways, but also creating some stress and challenges. So we just made a grant in an interesting partnership with a multi-sector partnership that's going to look at both technical data. Can we look at migration, mobility, and understanding where people are moving in and out of historic neighborhoods and spaces and places, but also understanding community data, going out to interview people firsthand. What are they seeing and hearing, so that we can really think about how to use that information to start to answer where should lines of public and private investment go to fight these issues, or whether we should be focused on other concerns if, in fact, they don't show up in the data. So it's an interesting.
So I think this is really interesting, because New Orleans is the kind of case study for community building and existing culture and great food culture and great ethnic cultures and amazing buildings. So, I mean, let's just say that you're pretty much unique, and we have to do everything to preserve you because you're kind of our beacon. But who's here from Jersey?
We would agree. Yeah.
I'm here
Jersey,
from
Rick?
Jersey. I'm telling you.
Jonathan's from Jersey.
I am.
There you go.
I
Jonathan
was
from Jersey.
Well, the thing is, what is your advice to us who are so torn apart? I mean, it's really insane. America is not connected. So we need to have some sort of conversation here about what can we learn from you in terms of this kind of creating communities that learn in an environment that doesn't encourage that. So any words of wisdom before we get to Kira's tweet here? Yes, any words of wisdom to us to me? I need help.
I guess one of my comments about that is that we've gotten so far removed from it in other parts of the country that they don't even remember they're missing it. To some extent, I think it's novel now when families live close to each other, and I don't know how you remind people of something they can't remember how it was. I mean, I think as an example, New Orleans does a great job, and I will say Katrina threw people all over the country, and that has been sort of an emotional thing, a very emotional thing for the city to try to figure out. I mean, people still ask, are people coming back? You know, and nobody's ever going to let go of that idea. But there's a lot of sort of cultural attachment here that I don't think other cities necessarily identify with anymore, because they have gotten so genericized. And I don't know how you tap into that for them.
I think every city has its own scale at which people self-identify. So, I mean, with the New York example, there are certainly strong neighborhoods in Queens and Brooklyn where it is, the ties are just as strong as they are here in New Orleans. They're different, but they're there and they can be tapped into. Here, just it happens at kind of the block level, but then the citywide level as well, and that's what's unusual about New Orleans, I think. And I think certainly it's about the size of the city. There's a confluence of factors with New Orleans. It's kind of that nice in-between size city that is it really is. It enables it, and then when you include the culture and the history here, and as well as some of the lesser positive aspects and the inequalities and challenges it's had economically, that's put together a bit of a gumbo to create that.
And I would just add, it seems as if in other communities that are valuing in many different ways than maybe previously their cultures and their social traditions and fabric, that once you begin to recognize that as a cultural economy, you know, and that's not something that really is where it's coming from here, though we're recognizing that value after the fact. In other places you might start with that and build from that base. And the other one is ideas of resiliency, where if you're trying to build resiliency, because we're all thinking about it, that if you realize that the first factor in that building is community. And that's something we certainly know in our bones and everywhere now. If you've lived through Katrina, you know that it was those communities that came back, those neighborhoods that came back were the ones where the community was strongest. So building resiliency out of this. And these are things that I think across the country, with culture and resiliency thinking tied together and discovering the homegrown sources for communal life that you can build some of this.
I just have one more comment that's a little less rosy about New Orleans. We don't always get it right. So one thing that we don't do that well, in my opinion, is preserve our resources like the French Quarter. We have, and I'm just going to be blunt, we have a mayor who's very interested in tourism and hospitality to grow this economy. He has very ambitious plans for the amount of you people who come through here every year. I mean, it's an enormous number he has by 2030 or something. I forget what the year is that but it's really, the priority is not preserving what's there. We actually have gone from 30,000 residents in the French Quarter to about 3,000 residents, permanent residents in the French Quarter. So it's a timeshare area now. It's very transitional. It's changed, and there's a real risk of it getting Disneyfied. Real risk. In fact, I saw Mickey Mouse standing in Jackson Square recently, and that was weird. But I just want to say that we don't have it completely right. We have priorities. Our politicians have priorities that are different from our priorities, and and I understand that there's an economy that we have to support, but there's neighborhoods, and then there's that public, larger scale.
Definitely. So I have one comment I wanted to add to, and this sort of relates to the input of the community question, and because you've all been speaking eloquently to the story that people that live here sort of participate in collectively. And so when I was preparing for the panel, I sent out a broadcast email to a bunch of people asking about the topic and the title, and just trying to pick people's brains because, looking for inspiration. And one very interesting comment that I received back was from architect Bill Reed. And he offered me a quote from Krishna Duplessis, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, and Dominique Hay's new book about regeneration, Designing for Hope. It comes out in a couple of weeks. And it was about the power of story. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, and that shared story, right? The shared story of place. So I just wanted to read that really quick, and then I have a question from the audience. Throughout human history, story has played an essential role in shaping and maintaining relationships between people, the place in which they reside, and past and future generations. Stories can also be powerful agents of change, and as Thomas Berry points out, we are in trouble right now because we do not have a good story. We are between stories, and we've not yet learned the new story. Stories help us organize and make meaningful connections between different pieces of information, like all those elements that we were talking about that make the community that learns work, mobility, food, etc., and that reveals a holistic, understandable picture. And they also create a collective identity, which you've spoken to eloquently, deepen connections and provide meaning. And it just seems so applicable to New Orleans and how you're talking about it. But the question, the much more practical question from our audience, is about how safety fits into the question. This is actually from a colleague of mine who's living in Charlottesville, and right now there was a UVA student abducted, and so there's a heightened moment of safety going on, and people are, cloistered in their cars, afraid to let their kids walk to the bus stop or to school or et cetera. I'm just wondering about just as a topic, when you're engaging with the community, how the safety question just generally plays in. And that actually even certainly relates to the issue of letting the the French Quarter neighborhood change in such a dramatic way, because that completely changes the safety profile of that place if you don't have the same eyes on the street that know what's going on and all that stuff, right? I mean, that's a dramatic residential adjustment.
That's been over a couple decades.
Yeah, no, it's,
Right.
it
I'm
didn't
just
just happen
saying-
yesterday.
I'm just wondering how the topic as a general thing
Yes.
fits
So,
in.
so I think one of the things we're thinking about on the safety front is how, on the opposite side of culture, is negative culture, and how a culture of disparity and now this gets into what we talk about, the sort of negative things, racism, and things that we've seen in this community for decades, and how that has created an environment and a lack of safety. So when Jonathan talks about this work that's been invested in Central City, which has been, unfortunately, ground zero in many ways for violence and safety issues in the city of New Orleans, a part of the reason that so many philanthropists and others made those investments is because they knew if they could turn the economic viability of that community around and could begin to create different spaces, safe spaces and places of opportunity, we would then begin to see the dividends of safety in that space. And we're thinking about that a lot in the civic design space, as well as some of the other opportunities. You mentioned the Network for Economic Opportunity, looking at historically Claiborne Avenue and that corridor. We're sitting on one edge of that footprint is one of the most dangerous jails in America, in the city that's the most incarcerated city in the world. And so when you have that access to information and data and understanding and analysis, it then is not a strange thing that you have safety issues. And we're really trying to think about, from a land use perspective, you see an ordinance set forth to minimize the size of that jail, which then reduces violence, which then creates more safety. And people are really trying to use every tool in the arsenal in the community development and policy space to really think about how to advance that issue. That's just one side of the safety conversation.
It's a big one to tackle.
Yeah.
So I do
But
have another,
necessary.
I sort of would like us to end on a kind of more systemic way of thinking, because I think if we just think about food, or we just think about bikes, or we just think about parks, we're just thinking about one thing. And I think everybody in this movement probably knows Wendell Berry and the conscientious farmer, and how you don't fix one part of the problem because you create 1,000 other problems around it, but you fix many parts of the problem simultaneously. So I think that's one of the issues that we really need to think about. The other thing is that how do those of us who don't have the story that New Orleans has learn from you to find our own story? I mean, I think, or can that be found at all, or should we just everybody move out of Jersey and forget about it?
No. I think there's stories everywhere. And I have a very, very dear friend here in New Orleans, not originally from here, Gary Eastland, who's spent a lot of time thinking about this and trying to bring the way of story making that we do somehow to other places, and cultivating that ability. And the stories are there. I mean, it's amazing to watch him go into the remote corners of Pennsylvania or outside of a new town in Arizona, and realize that once you start talking to people, there will be stories, and you start gathering them, and you start working with that in community building and place making. I think it's a little bit of a practice skill. We do it. This is something we do, but I think it can be found and cultivated in other places.
And I guess, that to me, that's the bulk of what I'm trying to do. Whenever I'm asked to come in and look at development capacity or opportunities in a community, you got to start with the momentum that's there. So you're not just going to pick a corner and build a building. You have to think about where the momentum's already happening. So in Jacksonville, they were already putting artists in the downtown core, and they were already, activating this certain part of the street, and they had already created this arts market. So we just built off of that momentum. And I think that's the case everywhere. Everybody has some kind of momentum. I mean, that's what the Main Streets program is about across the country too, is just finding what that brand is,
And I think I love the quote that you gave us. It reminds me of historian John Henrik Clarke, who also said something similar about history being a way for people to find themselves on the map of human geography. And so much of the discussions that we have, and I think what you've heard about people telling a story of days past that informs a story of days future, and how powerful a narrative and a story that is. And I think Colette and Sandy are right. That's a story that happens in every community in America.
I have my foot in both New Jersey and New Orleans, so I would add a dose of myself to that, which is that I think there is no doubt some stories are more compelling than others, and that's just reality. But I would agree that
moving to New Orleans because the story is much better.
Absolutely. It's much more enjoyable to say you're from New Orleans.
Jersey, though.
Don't tell them. Don't tell them. I
Deserting,
think I'm the only
massive
native up here.
desertion from the New Jersey Turnpike.
But I think New Orleans has done such a wonderful job of boosterizing itself.
Yeah.
Not all of which is accurate, of course, and so it's a small kernel of it oftentimes. But I think I would agree that even in a place that doesn't superficially lend itself to that there is something there.
Yeah, so there also are very interesting programs around the country. One of them exists in 2 cities so far that I know of. It started in Boston, called the New Urban Mechanics. You guys know about them? Does anybody know about the New Urban Mechanics? There are these bunch of young people embedded in the mayor's office, also in Philadelphia, that have a community outreach by social media first, and then through calling meetings and discussing issues of neighborhoods. So let's say that developer that is putting out all this survey about justifying their development, that developer is going to be questioned by the New Urban Mechanics conversation around that building, and maybe it will enrich the development. Maybe it will create something much more relevant than the developer had in mind. So I think there are those programs in place that are really, really key right now. And the fact that there are at least 2 mayors in this country, and I'm sure there are others, because mayors in the United States are spectacular these days. Our feds are horrible, but our mayors are stars. So I think that we can create some really interesting dialogue within every city. And I think that might be an interesting kind of thing to finish up with, is that every city has its dialogue. And
that's the path to that story of that place, and how to get to the nut of it, right? And actually how to engage. I think the other interesting thing about that is how to engage the different generations, as you were saying before, because I really do think that's a tricky one for many cities. There's a lot of separation.
Well, and the separation needs to be addressed because they're still building like senior communities and then young family communities. I mean, development is still doing the old-fashioned way, and in cities it's easier because there's such a natural mix.
Right.
But in the more spread out regions of the country, the practice is about something very 1970s, 1960s.
Well, and I guess I would say to that too, what is interesting when you look at the models where the resources are slim, you're forced to work with all of the different partners and stakeholders. You have to engage people. Developers can't do something in a silo if they need layers of financing to get a project done. So it sort of forces that kind of integration and the conversation is forced. I think in those areas where the resources are just abundant, or market is driving, that's when the government really has to kind of push back and have some kind of sensibility, which goes back to helping people understand good design and good planning, right? So there has to be a pressure on developers, whether it's through zoning or funding or whatever.
And let's not remember one statistic. 79 million baby boomers are not going to be put into senior communities. We want to be part of everything. We want to drink and eat and smoke and do everything, and do it with you, and do it with little babies, and do it with, work with everyone. So I think we really need to think about that, because I think that's also part of the connectivity of the 21st century. I think it really is. The generations do want to connect. And I think that's important for all of us to work on. Happy, healthy communities. Thank you.
Thank you.